Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing Audition. This film came out in 1999 and it was directed by famed Japanese director Takashi Miike. If you have never seen this film before, just do me a favor and turn this review off right now and go watch it. I think it's best to go into this movie as blindly as possible, as in don't read a synopsis, try to not even look at the movie cover. I think that gives away way too much. I think you should probably get like a friend to press play for you or something. And once you've done that, by all means, come back and listen to what I have to say. But for those of you who have seen the film, you know it is a film that is so brilliantly implanting the clues ever so subtly and so meticulously that you don't even realize how it's affecting you until the big climax at the end. And it completely shocks you even so. This is a film that subverts genre conformity and it subverts feminine submissiveness to dominance, which is something that you don't see particularly in the horror genre. And it's doing all of these things so that it allows us to see how expectations and traditional gender roles are so effective. They are still so easily projected onto the other person in a relationship, and we can't escape that. This is a film about a man named Aoyama. He is a widower. He's been a widower for many years, and he's raised his son all on his own. And at this point, his son is almost a grown man. He's a teenager, and he tells his dad, I think you should get married again. You seem very lonely. And Aoyama's friend, who is a film producer, decides to use an audition as a fake production so that Aoyama, can look at each girl and basically audition them for himself. They don't know that they're being auditioned to be his next wife, but he's basically looking at all these women and trying to figure out who is the best fit for him. It's like a dating website. It's like Tinder or OkCupid, Bumble, any of those things before they actually existed. And it's just very strange auditioning a woman for marriage, but in this day and age, it seems quite close to what we experience. There is one girl that sticks out from all of the rest to Aoyama, and she's really different. She's very shy and very modest just in terms of her body language and certainly the clothes that she wears, very conservative. He is really intrigued by her maturity and her seemingly kind nature, but of course she is not at all who she appears to be. There's a lot of subtext in this film, and there are so many interesting ideas going on, and I do think it might be one of the most unique and one of the most brilliantly constructed horror films I've ever seen if you're looking at this from a tonal perspective. The film starts out very, very quietly. And I think that this is the way that more horror films should be handled. I've thought that for a long, long, long time, because usually in your typical horror movies, there are so many overt clues that prove to you early on that it's a horror movie. And of course that works in some instances, but I think in other ways it kind of cheapens the effect later on. There's usually like a really sinister opening to prepare you for the thrills that will happen in the third act, or there might be kind of like a soundtrack that sounds a little bit off or whatever. But this movie really doesn't do much of that, or if it does, it's very subtle to the point where you don't even notice it. The first half of the film is really quiet and very methodical. It actually reminds me of like an Ozu film, a Japanese film like that, like a Tokyo Story, for instance, which is a movie that is very focused on behavior and quiet, very reflective moments. And that is meant to manipulate and throw you off for sure, because I think this movie wants you to feel like when you're starting to watch it, oh, this is a very traditional Japanese film. And it reflects the personality too of Aoyama, who is a very quiet man and a kind man who is obviously tied to many of the traditions of his past in terms of the way that he talks about marriage and the way that he sees relationships. Even though I do think that he is, he says everything with very good intentions, there are things that are just off-putting in terms of the way that he talks about women, especially to his producer friend. Now, I actually think that the producer is a lot more sexist than Aoyama is, but he kind of goes along with it. There's a moment early on in the film that takes place at a bar where he and the producer are both just sitting there, and there are these girls in the back of the room. They're probably in their early 20s, screaming and yelling as they do. And they just kind of look at them and they're like, oh, they're so stuck up and they're so stupid, these young people. But they say that because they cannot relate to them. So they dismiss them in that way because these women are from a different generation that they may see as a more disrespectful generation, a more salacious generation. I personally think that this movie has a cheekiness to it, a cheeky tone, especially in certain moments. When we see Asami, who's the woman that Ayama falls for, there is a sort of a sugar-coated tenderness to it, a kind of a cheesy romantic feel, especially with the score, with the music. And music is employed in very interesting ways. In particular, I think the audition sequence, or that big montage, which is beautifully put together. But there's this music that plays on top that's meant to be very playful and cute. But what's going on during the actual interviews, to me, is kind of disturbing, especially as a female myself. Even though the sequence does have a comical effect, there's a real eerie quality to it. And the whole film has that. Just something about it is just slightly cold. The way that the camera is very still and very distant, and the angles at times are a little bit strange and unexpected. In the montage in particular, it to me is very haunting, and I didn't really get that as much the first time I saw the film, but the more I watch it, I realize it, especially that very first shot where it's just the room, a long shot, and you just see the chair right in the center of the frame. Kind of unsettling. And to keep going with that idea, so much in that sequence reflects kind of the facade of relationships and what you see in dating websites. And when you're an established adult who thinks you know yourself really well, you start to look for people to meet your needs and for people to do things that appeal to you rather than looking at the person for who they are. You get to pick your age range, and most of the time you're looking for women that are probably between the ages of 21 and 30, we're gonna guess. Ayama wants to know, does the perfect girl that he's looking for, does she dance? What does she do for a career? Can she cook? And these are, just basic questions that of course are informative, but there's that whole feeling of every question they're asking is really to benefit himself. He's not really listening to these women and what they have to say because he wants a woman that can fit his narrative, the story that he's trying to tell, or, the story that they're trying to tell with this fake movie that they're producing. So hence auditioning and dating, they go hand in hand, and it's a metaphor. And the women themselves too are very dependent on this need to be liked by these men as a sort of reassurance for their self-esteem, not only because they want to get a part in a movie, but it's a reassurance that they can have that confidence within themselves because they need permission to. And Asami reflects that perfectly because she of course writes an essay, and that's immediately what Ayama reads and he's intrigued by. She says all of these things that she thinks will make her seem pleasing, that show good sides of herself. And she's lying about it, really. I mean, for the most part, some of it's true, but she's leaving out so much information. And why is she doing that? Because she doesn't want to reveal the darker sides of herself, because she was a victim of abuse. She doesn't want to show her weaknesses. She wants to fit a mold, which in itself is very distorted. And what I said earlier, I'm going to reiterate here because it's the key to me for what makes this movie so tragic, so heartbreaking, is that Ayama is not some cliche. He's not some character that's some horn dog. He's very respectable. He does things with the best intentions, as I've said. And even if his view of women is maybe a little bit distorted, I don't think that it comes from a bad place. It's just what he's known. And we see this explored later on, because actually my favorite part of the film is the third act. Now, I know I very rarely say that, but this is that good of a movie that they're able to carry it all the way through. It's a great film from beginning to end. And I love that sequence the sequence that happens towards the end of the film. It takes this very surrealistic turn. It's a very strange twist. And you start to see Asami's history coming to the surface. And Ayama is confronted with all of these Freudian ideas where all the women in his life begin to merge together and sexuality becomes much more layered and much more complicated. A lot of people think about this sequence and have analyzed it to death. People want to know, when does the dream really start in the movie and where does it end? Also, who is really dreaming the dream? It seems like it might be Ayama, but it might be Asami as well. And as interesting as it is to kind of unpack that and try to figure things out on a more literal level, I don't think that it's that important in terms of the overall intent of what that sequence is trying to do. I think it's you should really focus more on what it's trying to do psychologically. It's like a psychological journey. And it's got many metaphors in it that reflect the human psyche and the human experience. And it's done brilliantly. And the ending is really fucked up. I mean, it's something that you don't see coming. I didn't see it coming at all. It's barbaric, it's twisted, and ultimately really, really tragic. When I was younger, I sympathized more with the Ayama character for obvious reasons. But the older that I get, I started to sympathize with both characters. I feel sympathy for Ayama because he was just somebody walking blindly into something that he didn't understand, and he got trapped by it. And of course, that had major consequences for him. But I feel for Asami as well, because she too is very much like him in the sense that she is projecting an idea onto him, but just in a very, very different way. She was abused as a child, sexually abused. So because of that, she instantly has this idea of what all men are like, and she doesn't trust anyone because of that. So because of these traumatic experiences, she has become dominant. And again, that's something you don't see that often. It's the subversion of the horror genre that stands out to me as something that allows you to question things a little bit more. But this film is really striking on an emotional level beyond, what happens, the literal events of the story, because it's ultimately about relationships. It's about two people who cannot see each other for who they are because of the worlds that they grew up in. He was very traditional, she was very tragic, and that has sort of distorted their view of love. They're shaped so much by their environments in ways that ultimately make it impossible for them to truly see each other in a fully dimensional way. Yes, the film does get better the more and more you watch it. It's, I think, an absolute masterpiece, and I could talk about it all day, but I'll spare you. But yeah, it's a very different horror film for sure, and that to me is what is so intriguing about it. Seeing a different perspective is always worth checking into. And that is my review. Thank you all for listening. If you want to check out any of my social media information, it's below. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.